You ready to do this, man?
I'm gonna try.
What do you wish you would have known about leadership and pastoral ministry in your 20s and 30s?
I wish I had better conflict management skills, because sometimes you have this real passion, but you don't know how to get people to agree with you. So I think conflict management is something as a young pastor, patience that you really need to focus on, because sometimes we get so impatient with what God has on our heart, we can steamroll people without getting them to buy in.
That's great. What's one thing you would have done differently early in your ministry?
I would have started ministry earlier. I didn't start ministry till I was 28. So I feel like, although there was a lot of blessings and skills I learned in the professional space, which I left at 38, I feel like I may lost some of my prime years to do some things in ministry.
What's one spiritual discipline or activity that you found most helpful in your ministry?
Seeking out things that are for spiritual care. So doing things like I did the Ignatius track with a group of pastors last year, and doing it in a group environment, because sometimes you have your own quiet time and prayer time, but going through those spiritual disciplines in a very structured and group way builds a lot of accountability.
What's one behavior or trait that you see derail more pastors' ministries?
Arrogance. It's so easy when you get any success to really not attribute it to God. You really want to attribute it to, well, I preached well, or I came up with a plan. And the reality is, I believe that the majority of pastors are working really earnestly, and sometimes God blesses you in a situation more than somebody else. But it's not because you're better, because everybody's really trying to do what God wants them to do.
Yeah. Now, you're super busy in ministry. You do a lot in a very busy city, but you're also married. And so how do you maintain the priorities of God is number one, and not ministry, but God, and my spouse is number two? When you're good at ministry and you love ministry like you and I do, it's really easy for ministry to climb up the ladder. So what have you done to keep your priorities?
Well, to be honest, when I worked in the corporate space, I suffered from a lot of burnout, and I also overworked, and it put a lot of stress on my marriage. So when I started ministry full time, it became a big focus not to get into those habits or break those habits. So me and my wife have worked out things like days we work from home, so there's some quality time there. I've really worked on developing a team of volunteers and paid staff. I think particularly as pastors, my job is not to be the best at everything. My job is to find the best people for everything. And then be comfortable with the fact that people aren't going to do it 100% the way I want it, but be comfortable that God can make it work out exactly right.
Great. How have you effectively moved from work to rest? How have you developed a Sabbath? You talk about working from home, but that's still work. Every time you can flip the switch and just say this is Sabbath?
Yes. I was on a trip to Israel, and I was talking to a rabbi, and the rabbi looked at me and said, "What's your hobby?" And I started describing hanging out with my wife and going to conferences. And he said, "That's great. That's stuff you do to enjoy, but what's your hobby?" And that's how I picked up photography and actually setting things aside that are fun and relaxing and intentionally mine, not because it's spending time with anybody else, and then setting time and days to really do that. So I'll go out with the camera for 2, 3, 4 hours and just take hundreds of photos of the people in the street. And it really relaxes me, because you're focusing on composing the image, not on talking. So it's really relaxing.
Great. How about one book that you think every leader should have on their shelf and should actually read?
Can I give 2?
Yeah.
I think, well, I'll give you 3.
I said 2.
Mere Christianity, because it always humbles me and remembers the beginning process of becoming a believer. Richard Foster's Spiritual Disciplines, because I think, you come into church, you hear the Bible, but how do you make that very practical? I think Foster's great foundational stuff. And that 101 Things Every Pastor Should Know gives you some more of the mechanics of it, the metrics of ministry, how you judge things, that kind of stuff.
That's a great book.
It's an amazing book, right?
For young pastors, there's nothing like it. It's like, how many people need to be in the nursery?
Exactly.
They wrote a book about that. Like, how many parking spots do you have? That's a great, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's a great book.
I use that one more than So how about more experiential? Like, is there a conference or podcast or like TEDx thing? Like what is something that you think pastors could experience that would help?
I'll give so a couple of things. I think Order of the Flame is particularly good for the Methodist tradition, because especially if you're doing ministry on edge, you feel like an outlier many times. But when you meet an outlier from the Wesleyan and United Methodist, it's like you're not alone in it, and there's a lot of shared context there. I definitely recommend at least going to a GLS, Global Leadership Summit, offsite stuff. I don't agree with 100% of speakers, but there's always at least 4 or 5 nuggets I get each year when I watch that. I love Carrie Newell's writing on ministry and practical, and Chris Valutin has some real good spiritual stuff. So,
perfect, yeah. Mm-hmm. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes as pastors, we get like really 2 great opportunities. And even in ministry, it does happen a lot. It might not be opportunities for us, but just directions our church could head in that are both good, directions your life could head in, or choices you can make. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you, like, what's your process to make the decision between 2 equally great opportunities?
It's very difficult. So I'll give you a practical example. When I first got to Palo Alto and the university started really growing, we became the black church. So the mayor, the pride, everybody, I get emails for every cause and to be at every event in Palo Alto, be partners. This is the thing that I look at. First of all, I go, if something comes to me as an opportunity, generally it's a person asking. First question is, do I have a relationship with this person, cause, or issue before the request? Number 2, does it fit in our framework of reach, care, grow? And then 3rd, does it fit in our vision of redreaming the church? If it doesn't meet those 3 barriers, then I'll pray about it, but it's probably not going to happen.
Okay, perfect. That's awesome. In business, because you came from that arena, like, you know that like they're often asking in companies and corporate boardrooms, what's the smallest change we can make that would have the biggest positive result? So in ministry or in a pastor's life, what's like a small thing they can do that they have no idea makes like an exponential impact later on?
I think it's where we put our energy. I think currently in American church culture, we spend 80% of our time dealing with issues, problems, people, controversies. What I found is I don't get into the issues and problems and naysayers. That gets 20% of my time. I got to spend 60 to 80% of my time developing the new initiative, the new things, the new ministry that will push the church forward. So I think it's just that balance of time. Don't let the negative, the naysayers, the lack of resources consume you. Spend 80% of your time figuring out how to make it work.
Finally, we often talk about being lifelong learners or continuing to grow. Like, so what would you say, like in this season or chapter of life, what are some things you're doing to ensure that you're growing, to ensure your leadership potential continues to climb?
Every year I seek out some sort of pastor development cohort. So last year I did soul care, which was very much about inner disciplines. This year I'm working with a social justice cohort of pastors. And we meet once a month for 6 or 7 hours, bringing subject matter experts. Next year I'm going to go to Indiana Wesleyan. And you've got to always be in the process of looking for those opportunities to keep your mind fresh, because ministry can be a grind. You stand up on Sunday morning, you preach. Monday you take off. Tuesday you're back on the road to go preach again the next Sunday. And you will burn yourself out if you're not constantly getting input. Your preaching becomes stale. It's like you've got to always be looking for fresh water.